In this video, we're going to learn full stack web development using the MERN stack, using MongoDB, Express, Node, and React. A to-do app is the minimal app that we can make that implements CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete. We're learning the essential fundamentals of full stack web development. This video is going to teach you that. So I'm using an Apple MacBook. I'm going to show you how to set up this full stack MERN app on your computer. Let's build this to-do app. This is how our app is going to look in a nutshell. This is our client. This is our front end. This is the backend server, and then this is the database. This server is going to expose endpoints that this front-end application can send requests to. So it might ask for the to-do data. It's going to send the request. This is going to get the data from the MongoDB database, and then it's going to return that data to the front end. Now let me show you the order we're going to develop these various applications. So first, we are going to use Postman. Postman is an application that will allow us to test the Node.js app. It allows developers to test, document, and share APIs. Instead of using React, we'll first use Postman to test this Node.js app. We'll send requests to Node.js, and then we'll make sure that we're getting requests back from Node.js. And then once we've got that down, we can bring in the MongoDB database, can connect with the Node.js app. And then once we confirm the endpoints that Node.js expose, which is basically our API using the Express framework, then we will create a React app, and we will connect that to the Node.js app instead of Postman, and then this will create a full stack application. So that's kind of the order we're going to do things, so let's get into it. Before we do this, there are a few things you want to have installed on your computer. You're going to want to have Node.js, Visual Studio Code, as well as Postman. So Node.js is going to allow us to run Node.js on our computer. Visual Studio Code is what we're going to use to write the code, and then Postman is going to be our client that we'll use with the Node.js app to test it before we connect the React app with the Node.js app. So let's start by opening up the terminal and let's create a new directory. I'm going to navigate into the desktop directory so that way we can easily see what's going on in case, some people are unfamiliar with the terminal commands. But we're going to make a new folder called To-Do app. We can see it's made right here. I'm going to navigate into the To-Do app, and I'm also going to create a new folder now called Server. Okay, so let me open that up. We got Server in here. I'm going to navigate into the Server folder, and I'm going to initiate a Node.js project with package.json by typing npm init. I'm just going to do -y to say yes for everything. And so this is going to create a package.json file for us, which is going to allow us to install dependencies. Let me open it with Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to type in code dot. So I'm going to open the current directory with Visual Studio Code. If you get this error, command not found, what you need to do is you need to open Visual Studio Code and you need to type Command-Shift-P, and then you can type in shell command install code. You're going to do this one up here. So you're going to click that, and now we're going to try that command up again, code dot, which is going to open the current directory, which is this folder right here. We're going to open it with Visual Studio Code, and now we can see the package.json. Right now, there are no dependencies, meaning there are no other libraries or projects that our current Node.js project is depending on. What we want it to depend on, though, is Express, because we're going to be using Express as our API. So I'm going to npm install Express. So now we can see Express is a dependency in this project. And I'm also going to install something called NodeMon. It's going to be a dev dependency. So we're only going to use this during development, it's not going to be used in the production app. It allows us to run the Node.js app. And whenever we make changes to our Node.js app, it automatically restarts the app. So that way, whatever changes we've made to it are live without having to close the Node.js app and restart it. So it's just a little convenient. And I'm going to create something called server.js. And this is going to be where our Node.js server is going to live. So first, I'm going to import Express. By the way, I have GitHub Copilot enabled, so it does autocomplete. And so then we're going to create an instance of the Express application. We can follow GitHub Copilot's recommendation here. Basically, we're going to create a simple endpoint for testing, which is basically going to mean whenever we send a GET request to the server at this endpoint, it's just going to respond with hello. So we'll just test it with that using Postman. And then we will make the server listen on our computer on port 3000. So we got a simple Express app created. Let's run it now. Nodemon server.js is how we can run it. If that doesn't work for you, you can do npx nodemon server.js, and that should run it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open Postman, create a collection. In this collection, you can add a request, and in here we're going to reference our local host. which is just the server running on our computer. Since we're running the server on port 3000, we're gonna have to send a request to port 3000. With this request, it's just a slash, meaning like there's nothing that has to come after this to send a request to it. So let's just send the get request to it, and we got an error. And I think it might be because I'm supposed to put the slash. So we sent that request and now responded with hello world, which is what we're responding here. So now we got a basic Express application running. When it comes to creating full stack web applications, there's an acronym called CRUD, which stands for create, read, update, delete. So if you are able to create a full stack application that creates data in a database, it's able to read that data from a database, and it's able to update the data in the database, and it's able to delete data in the database. That is essentially the foundational web development skills. So we're going to create a to-do app, which is going to implement each of these. So the way the client is going to interact with our Express app, it's going to use the HTTP protocol. And so HTTP is the way that servers interact with each other on the internet. And so there's different methods such as get, post, delete, put. And so when we create data, we're going to use a get request. When we read data, we're going to use a get request. When we create data, we're going to use a post request. And when we update data, we're going to use a put request. And when we delete data, we're just going to use the delete request. And then in terms of the endpoints that we'll use, for example, this endpoint that we're using here, when we get the data, we can just say to-dos / to-dos works. When we create a new to-do item, we can just use that same endpoint, and then we're going to send data through the request body, which we'll show you that in a second. And then when we update the data, we need to update a specific to-dos item. We can have another field that references the ID of the specific to-do item that we want to update. And then same thing for when we want to delete, we can reference a specific ID. So this is what we'll do. We'll create these 4 endpoints, and this will essentially have us create a simple CRUD full stack application using the MERN stack. So let's start by creating the read endpoint. And so this endpoint, we're going to call it to-dos. First, we'll just respond with a JSON response, and we can just respond with some mock data. That's totally fine. Okay. We just created this new endpoint, and since we have NodeMon running, it's going to automatically update. And so let's use Postman again. Now we need to change it to to-dos. And so now to-dos is going to return this array with this object inside it. Next thing we can create is the create endpoint. So this is going to be a post request. We're going to do app.post, and then this is going to be, same thing here. GitHub Copilot got it correct. Let's see what it does for us. Okay, it's not really doing anything. It didn't do what I wanted to do, so let's change it. So from the post request, basically what we're going to do is when we make a post request to to-dos, we want to send data to it in the body as JSON, and we want to specify the ID of the to-do that we want to update, and perhaps the text that we want to update. We haven't defined what the schema is going to look like in the database yet, but for now we can call it name, and we'll just say hello world. And so we want to send this data in the request body when we're making the post request to our Express.js server. And so we can access that data by, GitHub Copilot got it again. So if we look at it, we're sending ID and name. So we're going to take an ID and name out of the request.body. So it's going to be located in here. And just to confirm that we're being able to access it properly, let's save that and let's send a post request, and let's see if the server responds with what we sent it. Okay, so it's getting an error saying I cannot destructure property ID. Let's console.log what request body looks like. So I'm going to send that request again. If we look up here, it's actually undefined, so it looks like that's wrong. Okay, so I think we might need to add the express.json middleware. So let's do that right now. Express has something called JSON. That's middleware that's going to allow Express to parse incoming requests with JSON payloads, and it's going to make that parse data available in the request.body so we can actually access it. So we're going to say app.use express.json, and so this is going to make it to where this should work. So let's try to run that request again, and now it's working. Cool. So the JSON data that we sent using a post request to our server, it's being sent back. So we're just kind of verifying that we're accessing the data that we want to access. Now let's go on to creating our update function. So this was create. I'll have another one called, okay, let's see what GitHub Copilot does for us. Okay, perfect. So it does it for us whenever we make a request to, if it's a put request, after this slash, whatever number we put, that's going to be assigned to the ID field, which we can destructure from the request.params. And then, yeah, we're going to have this endpoint respond with that. So let's send a put request to this now, 234 with the name of hello world. Let's send that. We can see we got the ID that we passed in here and the request URL, as well as the name, which we passed in the request body. We're going to do something similar with delete. It should be like very similar. So yeah, we're just going to tell Express what the ID of the to-do item that we want to delete is. And so just to verify that, let's delete it. And now it's just returning the ID. So now we got a basic Node.js application. Now let's connect this to a MongoDB database and make this a real API. Okay, so next thing we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna download MongoDB onto our computer. First, we need to have Homebrew installed. So if you don't have Homebrew installed, this is for Mac OS specifically. If you have a Windows or different computer, you're gonna have to do your own research on how to download MongoDB. If you don't have Homebrew installed on your computer, you can open the terminal, type in brew version. And if it shows you a version, then you already have it installed. But if not, you need to install it. So you can go here, you can copy this command that should install brew for you. Now to install MongoDB, we can search up install MongoDB. So for me, I'm using a Mac OS platform and we can install the community edition. And then you can follow these prerequisites that it's showing you. It's saying you need to install Xcode. So if you don't already have that installed, you're going to want to do that. Same with Homebrew. Yeah, if you don't have it installed, it's going to want you to install that. We're going to copy these commands to install MongoDB, assuming you already have brew on your computer. So I'm going to paste that. We will install that. Okay, so that's finished. And then I don't think I need to brew update. I'm just going to do that since that's part of the instructions. And then after that, we're going to paste this command as well, brew install MongoDB community 7.0. And that's finished, so I'm going to paste this now. It should be installed now. We're going to run the MongoDB on our computer. So I'm going to copy this command, brew services start. And then to verify MongoDB has been properly installed and it's running on a computer, we can type in mongosh and that should tell us. It looks like we have access to the database and it looks like it's running. So I'm just gonna press Control C to exit out. So what we can start by doing is I'm actually gonna open up mongosh again and we can create a to-do database. So I wanna type in use to-do and this is going to use the to-do database, and if it doesn't exist, it's going to create it. And so since we just created this MongoDB database, it does not exist. So the first time that we use to do, it's just going to create it from scratch. And then we can create something called a collection. And we're going to call this collection to-dos. And so let's add a new document into our to-dos collection. And so we will reference the current database. We'll access the to-dos collection and we'll insert one. We have a name and an ID. So let's just call it, we got a name, let's call it hello world. And then we'll have the ID, we'll just name it to 2 for now, which is fine. And so then what we can do is we can type in show collections and that'll show our to-dos. And then to show all the documents in our to-dos collection, which is this one that we just created, is we can do DB to-dos and we're gonna find them all and we're just gonna make it pretty. So here's the database. We got this collection in there. So perfect. Notice how I added an ID, but this ID is actually already made for us. It already has an ID. So this might actually be redundant. We don't really need to do that in this case scenario, but that's fine. We know that moving forward. And so now what we can do is we can set up the simple read operation. We just read the to-dos and basically let's just return all the to-do items that we've made so far. First, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to install something called Mongoose, which allows us to easily interact with the data in the MongoDB database from our Node.js app. So we're going to install Mongoose. If we look at our package.json, we can see that it's right here now. And then so in our server, let's import it. So we're going to say const mongoose. Yeah, let's do that. And then here's GitHub Copilot suggestion again. And so this is the name of the database. So it should actually be to-dos is the name of the collection, but the name of our database is just to-do without an S. So we're going to take that out. And 27017 is the default port number, which MongoDB server listens on. This object that comes after is the second argument of MongoDB or mongoose.connect was the GitHub Copilot suggestion. The old parser has been deprecated, so we're using a new one. So this is just kind of boilerplate code, so you don't have to really worry about this too much. And this is more boilerplate as well. We can connect to the MongoDB database, and then after we connect, we can say connected to MongoDB. And then if there's an error, we can log an error too. It says connected to MongoDB. Okay, perfect. We can create our schema for to-do items. So we can call it to-do schema. Yeah, we can go with this. We'll have a name. Okay, this is perfect. Yeah, so I agree with GitHub Copilot's decision here again. Simple app, so GitHub Copilot can help us build simple apps pretty easily. But yeah, so this is going to be our schema for our to-do items. We're going to have a name, which is going to be a string. And then we'll also have a field called completed, which is just going to be a Boolean that indicates whether the to-do item is completed or not. We'll just create a model, which is based on this to-do schema. And this is going to allow us to interface with the to-dos collection in the database. In our get request route, instead of doing this, we can just grab all the to-dos from to-dos. We can access the to-do model, and we're just going to use the find function to find them all. We also need to make this async. Make this an async function. We can return a JSON response with all these to-dos. All right, so let's test that. Let's see if that works. Let's send a GET request again. We got that first endpoint down, connected to the database. So now let's modify this endpoint to be able to create data in our MongoDB database as well. Let's see if GitHub Copilot can get this for us. So getting the name, let's create it. And we're going to save that in the database. And then we're going to send it back as a JSON response. So let's test this now. So let's make this a post request to the same endpoint. And then, yeah, we'll pass in the name into the request body. We're gonna say second to-do item. Let's send that. Okay, cool. So we created the second one. So now let's switch to a GET request and see if it's in it. All right, perfect. Look at that. So we are connected to the MongoDB database. Now, what I'm gonna do here is let's still extract the ID from the params and the name and completed field from body, so I'm down with that. But instead of just returning it, what we want to do is we actually want to update that to-do item in the database. So we can reference the model, and we're going to find by ID and update. We're going to actually save it to a variable name so we can return it. So we can return it from this request. And so we're going to await that operation so we can wait for it to complete so it can be saved in this variable. And we're going to pass in the ID. That's going to help us find what to-do item we want to update. And then where we're going to update it is we're going to update the name with this name as well as completed. If the name field is undefined, then it won't update the name field. And if completed is undefined, it's not going to update that. So it'll only update whatever has a valid value or a non-undefined value. And then we're also going to add one more option at the end. We're going to say new is true. Basically what this is going to do is it's going to make it so that way whenever we find this to-do item that we're updating, it's going to return that to-do item after the update, not before the update. So that way we get the updated to-do, not the old to-do. And so then we'll just respond with the JSON response with the updated to-do. Let's save the file. We should be able to run this now. Here are the different to-do items. We're going to try and update this one, and we're going to change the name to updated. And so let's send that. Cool. Looks like it's updated. So let's create new requests on Postman so we can more easily like switch between different requests. Yeah, I'm going to have a GET request, which is just going to get the to-dos. And then I'll make this my post request. Save that. When I got it again, we can see that it was updated. Cool. The completed Boolean is still false. So let's change that now to true. Let's make sure that works. So it looks like that works. So let me delete that one. Let's run this again. Now we can see the completed field for this to-do item is true now. Finally, we're gonna update the delete endpoint. We're gonna get that ID that we're gonna delete. We're already doing that. And then we will get the deleted to-do item. And the way we're gonna get the deleted to-do item is we will await the operation. We're gonna access the to-do model. And there's, I think it's called find by ID and delete. Yeah, that works. And then we will just pass in the ID. We need to make this an async function again. So this is going to find the to-do item by that ID and return it. It's going to be saved to this variable, but then it's also going to delete it from the database. So let's test that now. So let's delete this to-do item that's not matching our current schema. It doesn't have a completed field and it's using a redundant ID. So let's delete that. Let me create a new request again, and it's going to be delete. And the one we want to delete, and let me save this. Yeah, we're going to delete this one. Paste that ID, send it. It's returning the one that is supposedly deleted. So let's go back here and get all the to-dos and make sure it's actually deleted. There we go. So now we have a to-do API, a Node.js app connected to our MongoDB database. And essentially we're using Postman as a client. And with this, we can add to-dos to our to-do list. We can delete to-dos. We can update to-dos. And so we could just use Postman to keep track of our to-do items, but we want to make things more pretty. We want to use a React application instead. So that way it's a better user experience for users to be able to interact with this. So that's what we're going to do next. So let's create our React application now. We got our server running. Now let's run our React.js server. We can cd into our desktop again. You can see here is the to-do app folder that we made, which is here. Let's make a new app, or let's go into the to-do app folder and let's create a new directory called client. This is where our React.js client will be, a React app. And then in here, we're going to use Vite. Create Vite app. Let's use this command. So this will create a new React app, and I'm going to do dot to create the app in the current directory rather than creating a new folder, because right now I'm already in the client folder. And we're going to use React, and then for simplicity for this tutorial, we'll just use regular JavaScript. Now we're in the client folder. We're going to npm install our dependencies, and then we're going to npm run dev. All right, so that's finished. I'm going to open this directory now with VS Code, and I'm also going to npm run dev. So this will run the React server locally. Let's copy this URL, and here's our React app. So this is boilerplate. This is just starting code that they give us. And so let's go to the app.jsx, and this is where we can edit our code to make the to-do app. I'm gonna delete some of this. We'll keep the CSS style, so that's fine. That'll probably make our app look a little nicer. And so right now we just got this hello world, and so let's start making our to-do app. We're gonna import the use state hook, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna say to-dos, set to-dos. We're gonna make it equal to some mock data in here, so we'll have the name and the completed. So we'll have name, example, completed, false. Now another one, example 2, we're going to say it's completed true. This will be our initial state, and we will render it. So we'll say const to-do items equal to to-dos.map, and we'll map through all the data in this array. So for each to-do, let's just return a div where in the middle of the div, we can just have the to-do.name there. All right, and so we can render the to-do items. Now we have this state, we're rendering the state properly, we're rendering the to-do items. Let's get that data from the actual MongoDB database instead. So I'm also going to import this hook called useEffect, and using useEffect, and I'm not going to teach React in this video. This is just more to show like the full stack application, how to build it pretty quick. I'm going to do this operation on mount. So when the React hook mounts, instead of using our state, we're going to fetch the data from our Node.js app, and then we're going to set the state to use that data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new function called fetch data. It's going to be an async function because whenever we send HTTP requests, it's an asynchronous operation. And we're going to get the response from Axios, because we're going to send a GET request to the endpoint that we were using in Postman already, but we're going to use it in our client app instead. After we get that response, we're going to set to-dos to be the response.data. So data should be the what the data is from that response. We're gonna have to call this function. Once this React app mounts for the first time, this hook should be called, and then it should set the data that we get from this response by getting the data from this endpoint into our state. So let's actually get rid of this mock state now. So let's initialize it as an empty array. Let's import Axios from Axios, and let's refresh the page. Okay, so we're getting a CORS policy error, allow origin. So what we probably need to add, which I forgot to add, but in our Node.js app, we may need to add the CORS middleware. So I'm gonna press Control backtick, and we're gonna npm install CORS. That's gonna be middleware, cross-origin resource sharing. We're gonna do const CORS equals require CORS. Now that we've installed it down here, when we're using the JSON middleware, we're also gonna use our CORS middleware. So let's save that, and let's see if this changes anything. Okay, cool. So now we're getting it, and then we're getting this error because in our React app, we need to indicate the key. We can just do to-do ID. That should be fine. So we'll refresh that. So we're getting updated. Not sure why that didn't fix it though. Anyways, it's not super important right now. But let's add more. Let's use Postman again. We're gonna need to create a new request. And this is going to be a post request. It looks like we didn't save that one. We're going to have a body, be a JSON body. We'll create a new to-do item. We'll send that. Complete is default is false, which is perfect. Now we're able to read the data from the database. And so now let's make it to where we can add to-do items from our React app. So let's add an input field, and we're going to have it as a type text. We're going to have a new state called value, set value, use state. It's going to be equal to an empty string. And we're going to use this empty string to, basically we're making this a controlled input. So we're going to set the value of our input field to be the value of our value state. On change, whenever we type any keys into our input field, we're going to execute this function, which will set our value to e.target.value. If you don't know what this is, like look up controlled inputs with React. So, okay, so that works. So now whenever I type it, this string should be saved in this state in value. You can add a button right under it called submit. I'm actually gonna put this in a form element so that way we can just press enter and it'll automatically submit it for us. We're gonna say input type equals submit. You can either press this input button or we can just press enter and it's gonna submit it. But we need to define the onSubmit function. What we can do is we're gonna create a new function called add to do. And for now, we can just console.log to do item to add, just so that we know it works. And then we're going to add whatever's stored in value. And then with this function that we're going to put in here, it's going to be passed in an event, and we want to prevent default, because if we don't prevent default, if I just do add to do and I put it in there, it's going to refresh the whole page. So we want to prevent that. We can do e.prevent default. We need the form we're going to say on submit, we're going to execute the add to do function. So first, let me not prevent the default, and it's going to do what it's already doing, which is when we type in code and we submit it, refresh the whole page. So then let's uncomment this. Now when we submit the form, it's going to execute this function because it's added as the value for the onSubmit prop for the form element. And so if I add something in now, it doesn't refresh the page, and then it tells us the to do item to add. So what we're going to do now is we are going to send an Axios.post request to the this URL, and then the data that we are going to send to it is going to be the second argument. It's going to have a name of whatever is in this input field value. And then after we do that, let's just reset value to be empty, so that way the input field is cleared, so that way it doesn't like stay there. So if I don't do that, for example, if I try to submit this, it just stays there. Let me refresh the page to show. So we added it, right? It's not showing yet, but if we set the value to empty, just makes it a little cleaner, so that way when we add it, it goes away. So we have these new to-do items added now when we submit it, but we have to refresh the page to be able to see those added to-do items. So what I want to do is we're going to create another function called const get to-dos. It's going to be an async function. It's basically going to be this fetch data function. So we're just going to call that function in the useEffect hook, but we're going to define it outside of the useEffect hook so we can call it again in our add to do function. So to prevent duplicate code, we can just reuse that code. We can make this, we don't need to make it an async function. Yeah, so let's try it again. Testing. So now it doesn't always update though, which is interesting. So we're gonna have to investigate that. Yeah, what's happening here is like, I need to make this an async function and I need to await this post request to make sure it's finished before we continue. These functions are asynchronous. So as this is executing, this is going to execute as well. And it's possible that this get to do's function executes before we actually finished adding it to the database. Let's see if we can. So yeah, now we can add the to-dos. Let's create a function that deletes the to-do items now. So for each to-do item, let's wrap the name around with the span element. And then right next to it, we'll have a button and we'll just call it delete. So now all of them have, a delete button right next to it. Let's make this a little prettier probably. So let's modify the styles. Let's do display flex. We'll do justify content space between. Okay, so that's a little cleaner, right? They kind of like lined up now. What we want to do is when we click the delete button, which is this one right here, we're going to execute the delete function, which has not been defined yet. So we're going to say delete to do, and we will have an ID that's passed into this delete to do item. We're going to go to Postman again. Okay, and we're going to find this request. That's the endpoint. We're going to make this an asynchronous function again, and we'll await axios.delete. I'm going to make this a backtick string so that way we can insert the ID, and then we'll insert ID into here. We can call get to do's again, kind of like how we do when we add the to do. We're going to do that then. We're going to do that again after we delete it because we want it to refetch the to do items after we delete it. Here, let's just say on click, when we click this delete button, we're going to call the delete to do function. So now let's try it. Network error again. Let's check it out. Yeah, I forgot to pass in the ID into this delete to do function. So when we're calling it here, we can't just call it so here's the to do.id, so we can access the ID of the current to do item when we're mapping through it. We can't do this because this is just going to call it immediately before we even click it. We want to instead make this a function that when it's clicked, then it's going to execute this function where then it calls the delete to do function by passing in the ID. So we need to wrap it like that. So let's try this again. Okay, so it's still not working. And if I go into, see, we're getting some errors here. Okay. So what I can do is I can try and debug this. So we're trying to pass in an ID. Let's make sure that ID is correct. So I'm going to, let's clear this console. Let's delete it. Okay. Oh, okay. So ID is undefined here. So it's not actually what we want. So let me console.log to do to see what it looks like. So we can see the ID is actually an underscore ID, not regular ID. So that was my mistake. So what we're going to do here is we'll just destructure underscore ID as well as name out of the current to do item. We will just pass that in. Let me make sure this is working properly now though. So like if I do delete to do, let me console.log ID again to make sure we're actually getting the ID. So let's clear that, delete it. Okay, cool. So we got an ID now. We're still getting an error now, so let's check it out. So let's restart the server, maybe because it crashed and it didn't restart, so I don't know. Okay, cool. So I think it might be working now. There's no errors. It's not updating though, so let's refresh the page and see. Yeah, those are deleted. Refresh the page. It's just not updating after we delete it now. So, I forgot to call it. So that was the issue. So delete it. Cool. There we go. Now we can delete our to-dos. And then just to organize this code a little bit, it's starting to get a little long. Let's group our functions together. And then, so we'll have, our state initialized at the top. We got the use effect hook. Then we got our functions. And then we got when we map the to-do items. So we have our create, read, and then we have our delete function. We don't have the update function yet. So for our update function, let's just make it to where we can mark a to-do item as complete. So we'll just say const complete to-do. And we'll do something similar to the delete to-do function. We're going to take that ID, except it's going to be a put request. And then we're going to set the completed value to be the opposite of what it currently is. Let's just call this like, just say toggle complete. And let's also pass in whether it's completed or not. And then we will just take the inverse of that. So that way, if it is completed, we're gonna incomplete it. And if it's incomplete, we're gonna complete it. Before I do this, actually, let's make sure that we can show in our app whether a to-do item is completed or not. So let me add a new to-do item, make this completed to be true. So let's just update it to where one of them is completed. So we'll update this ID and we'll say completed is true. So then just to confirm, when I look at all the IDs or all the to-do items, yeah, one of them is not completed, one of them is completed. So now we got these two to-do items. So to mark it as completed or not completed, let's first start with the React code that shows whether something is completed or not. So for each to-do item, let's add a new input field, and we'll make it of a type checkbox. And we can use the checked propped. It will be equal to whether the to-do item is completed. So we'll get the other field and that. And if it's completed, let's just make sure that we're getting it properly. So let me console.log completed. So if I refresh the page, one of them is marked as completed, one of them is marked as incomplete. That's exactly what I wanted. And so, you know, the one that is marked as completed has that, it's checked now. So I'm gonna get rid of that. And so then what we wanna do is when we click this checkbox, we want to execute the toggle complete function, and we're going to call it with the ID and the current completion status of that to-do item. And so then we have this ID, we have the current completion status, and we're going to toggle it. All right, so let's see how that looks. Okay, we're getting another error. Checked prop form. I think we needed to use, instead of on click, we're going to use the on change field. So here we're going to say on change. We're going to do that same thing. We're going to execute the toggle complete function. I meant to do underscore ID. Let's try that again. Okay, cool. And now let's make sure like it persists in the database. So like if I marked them both incomplete and now they're still incomplete when I refreshed it. If I complete them both, refresh the page, you know, it's persisting in the data. So this is exactly what we want. We're able to mark one as complete. Just to like make the styles a little better, we're going to add text decoration, and we're going to say if the current to-do item is completed, then we're going to make it have a line through it. Else, mark it as null. Just to make this a little better, let's kind of center everything vertically. And so display flex line, and then I'll do align items, center. So that's kind of centers it. We can add a gap. Cool. So now we have our simple to-do app. It's our React connected to a Node.js app, which is connected to a MongoDB database. We can create, we can read, we can delete, and we can update. So this is a basic full stack MERN application that implements CRUD, a web application. And so congrats with that. Things get more complex when you have more data and there's more relations between the data. And that's where coding best practices come into play. Really, it just depends on your ability to problem solve and write clean code if you can build a much larger scale application. But yeah, this is your foundation. So I hope this video was helpful. If you're looking to fast track yourself into software engineering, again, book a call with me in the description. We can talk. If you have any other video suggestions, feel free to comment on this video. The next logical step for this application, if you want to continue learning, is deploying it to production. So like you could add this code to a GitHub repository, and then you can deploy that code to a different server that's connected to the internet. So you can access it via your Chrome browser, for example. Right now, this is just running on a local host on your computer. So that would be like the next thing that I would recommend you do. If you want to see me make a video on that, go ahead, leave a comment as well. Let me know, give me some feedback. But otherwise, yeah, take care.